From the frozen rivers of the Ice Age to the crushing depths of the Mediterranean, 2025 has been a year that completely rewrote the history books. We used to think we knew the timeline of human civilization: stone tools, then farming, then cities. But new discoveries, from a 1.5 million year old engineering breakthrough in Tanzania to a ghost lineage hidden in South American DNA, have shattered that simple narrative. In this deep dive, we will uncover the 20 most mind-bending archaeological breakthroughs of the year, reveal the face of the oldest European, and open the sealed lead coffin of a Roman aristocrat that time forgot. We'll walk the lost land bridge that once connected Europe and Asia and stare into the black room of Pompeii, where the ancients contemplated the end of the world. From the dense jungles of Ecuador, where LiDAR has just stripped away the canopy, to reveal a garden city rivaling the size of Roman London, to the frozen north of China, where we have finally stared into the face of a lost human species that ruled the ice. We have found the fingerprints of engineers in the fossil record 1 million years before they were supposed to exist. We are no longer just digging for pottery shards. We are using artificial intelligence to read books that were burned 2,000 years ago. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. So whether you're watching closely or just listening in, settle in and let the outside world fade for a while. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. In 2025, 2 separate discoveries on 2 different continents shattered our timeline of human innovation. They forced us to look at the primitive mind and realize that it was capable of engineering and exploration far earlier than we ever believed possible. To understand this, we have to go back, deep back, to the very cradle of our species in East Africa, and then fast forward slightly to a hidden cave system in Spain that shouldn't have been occupied, but was. Let's start in Tanzania. The Olduvai Gorge is often called the Grand Canyon of Evolution, a place where the layers of the earth read like a book of human origins. For decades, paleoanthropologists here have focused on the Oldowan stone tools, simple choppers and scrapers made by smashing river rocks to create a sharp edge. These are impressive, certainly, but they are crude. However, a groundbreaking study released this year focused on a different material entirely: bone. Researchers identified a collection of bone tools dating back 1.5 million years. This date is staggering. It places the artifacts firmly in the era of Homo erectus and Paranthropus boisei. These were not modern humans. Their brains were significantly smaller than ours, roughly 2/3 the size. Yet the analysis of these tools reveals a level of cognitive sophistication that rivals much later humans. To understand why this is a big deal, you have to understand materials science. Stone is what scientists call isotropic. This means it has a uniform structure. If you hit a piece of flint or obsidian, the shockwave travels through it in a predictable cone, fracturing it in a way you can plan on for. It doesn't matter which way you hold the rock, the physics remains the same. Bone is different. Bone is anisotropic. It has a grain. It has a complex internal architecture with a hard, dense outer shell, cortical bone, and a spongy honeycomb interior, trabecular bone. It is organic, flexible, and chemically complex. If you try to nap bone like you nap stone, it shatters. To work bone, you have to understand its structural properties. You have to know how to strip the periosteum, the connective tissue wrapping the bone. You have to understand that you can't just strike it, you have to grind it. The tools found in Tanzania show that 1.5 million years ago, our ancestors had figured this out. They weren't just smashing bones to get to the marrow, they were selecting specific long bones from large mammals and engineering them into tools. The most shocking discovery in this collection was the presence of barbed points. In the timeline of technology, the barb is a massive leap forward. A simple sharp stick is for stabbing or thrusting. A barbed point is a piece of complex engineering designed for a specific biological interaction: retention. It is designed to enter the flesh and stay there. This implies a hunting strategy that is far more complex than simple scavenging or ambush. It suggests the use of projectile technology, harpoons or spears, meant to secure fish or small game so they couldn't escape. The microscopic wear analysis on these tools, looking at the scratches and polish on the surface at 100 times magnification, tells us even more. Some of these bones were shaped into smooth spatulas, used for digging tubers or processing plants. This confirms that Homo erectus wasn't just a brute force predator, they were technicians. They looked at the skeleton of a gazelle and saw a toolbox. They understood that bone has a tensile strength that stone lacks. Stone snaps under pressure. Bone bends. If you are digging in hard soil or trying to spear a thrashing fish, bone is the superior material. The fact that they recognized this material advantage 1.5 million years ago proves that the design mind predates Homo sapiens by 1 million years. While these engineers were mastering materials in Africa, another group of pioneers was doing something equally impossible. They were walking into Europe. For a long time, there was a hard rule in archaeology known as Fortress Europe. The theory was that while early humans spread into Asia quite early, they avoided Europe. The continent was too cold, too dark, and too full of apex predators, like saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas. The consensus was that humans didn't possess the technology or the social organisation to breach this fortress until roughly 500,000 years ago. That consensus just evaporated. At the archaeological site of Atapuerca in northern Spain, specifically in a cave section known as Cima del Elefante, the pit of the elephant, excavators found a face. It is a partial face, a maxilla, upper jaw, and a cheekbone, but it is unmistakably human, and it is old. Using cosmogenic nuclide dating, a method that measures how long sediment has been buried and shielded from cosmic rays, the team dated this fossil to between 1.2 and 1.4 million years ago. This is the oldest human face ever found in Europe. It pushes the arrival of humans on the continent back by nearly 1 million years. It means that small bands of hominids, likely a species called Homo antecessor, the pioneer man, had walked out of Africa, crossed the Middle East, and traversed the entirety of southern Europe to reach the Atlantic coast of Spain long before we thought it was possible. The morphology, or shape, of this face is deeply puzzling for scientists. You might expect a face this old to look very primitive, heavy, protruding, ape-like. But the Cima del Elefante face is surprisingly modern. It is flatter and more vertical than the faces of some later species. This has sparked a controversial theory that some of the facial features we consider unique to us, the flat face of Homo sapiens, actually evolved very deep in our lineage, only to be lost and re-evolved later. Or perhaps we are seeing a direct line of ancestry that we haven't mapped yet. But the real story here isn't just the anatomy, it's the survival. Think about what it took to live in Europe 1.4 million years ago. There was no fire-starting technology that we know of for certain at this specific site yet. The winters were brutal, the nights were long, and the competition was fierce. The cave where the face was found also contained the bones of jaguars, wolves, and lynxes. These people were not the top of the food chain. They were scrapping for survival in a hostile ecosystem. The discovery of this face forces us to rewrite the narrative of migration. It wasn't a calculated military campaign where humans waited until they had better spears and warmer clothes to move north. It was a slow, desperate, and brave trickle. These populations were likely small, prone to local extinction, and constantly stressed. Yet they persisted. They adapted to the changing seasons of the north, shedding the biological rhythms of the tropics and learning to read the harsh landscape of the Iberian Peninsula. When you combine the Tanzanian bone tools with the Spanish face, a new picture of the early Pleistocene emerges. It wasn't a stagnant time of waiting for evolution to give us bigger brains. It was a dynamic era of experimentation. In Africa, hominids were becoming material scientists, exploiting the properties of bone to create specialized tools. In Europe, they were becoming explorers, pushing the boundaries of their habitable zone into the cold unknown. These discoveries remind us that we are not the first smart humans. We are simply the latest ones. The intellectual hardware required to engineer a barbed point or navigate a new continent has been running in our family for over 1 million years. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. Giants who, until this year, were completely invisible to us, hidden in the grain of a fossilized bone and the dust of a Spanish cave. If you look at a textbook from 50 years ago, the story of human evolution looks like a conga line. You have a hunchbacked ape at the back, slowly standing up straighter and straighter until he turns into a modern guy in a suit carrying a briefcase. It is a neat, tidy image of progress. It is also completely fictional. The reality of our history is not a single line. It is a tangled, chaotic bush of diverging branches. For most of our time on Earth, Homo sapiens was not alone. We shared this planet with a diverse cast of other human species, cousins who were just as smart, just as capable, and sometimes much physically stronger than we were. But until 2025, many of these cousins were just ghosts. We knew they existed because of fragments of DNA or a stray finger bone, but we couldn't see them. We didn't have a face to put to the name. That changed thanks to a discovery that technically happened in 1933 but was kept secret for nearly a century. This is one of the strangest stories in modern archaeology. In the frozen north of China, in the city of Harbin, a labourer was working on a bridge over the Songhua River. While digging in the mud, he hit something hard. He pulled out a skull. Even to his untrained eye, he knew it was strange. It was human, but it was massive, far larger than any normal human skull, with thick, beetling brows and square eye sockets. The year was 1933, and the Japanese Imperial Army was occupying the region. The labourer knew that if he turned the skull over to his Japanese supervisors, it would be stolen as a trophy of war, so he made a choice. He wrapped the skull in cloth, took it home and threw it down a well in his backyard. He told no one. He lived his entire life with a prehistoric monster sleeping in his well. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed that he finally whispered the secret to his family. They went to the well, retrieved the object and donated it to science. In 2025, a comprehensive analysis of the Harbin cranium was finally completed, and the results were explosive. The skull represents a new species of human, which researchers have named Homo longi, or Dragon Man. And dragon is an appropriate name because this individual was built like a tank. The skull held a brain roughly the same size as ours, but it was housed in a structure designed for a world of brutal physical demands. The dating reveals that Dragon Man lived at least 146,000 years ago. This was the height of a deep ice age. While our ancestors were enjoying the tropical warmth of Africa, Dragon Man was thriving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The physical analysis suggests a population adapted for extreme cold. They were likely massive, stocky, and incredibly strong, capable of hunting woolly rhinos and mammoths in sub-zero temperatures. But the real scientific bombshell is the genetic implication. For years, geneticists have been tracking a ghost population in our DNA called the Denisovans. We know the Denisovans existed because they interbred with ancient humans. Their genes are found today in populations in Tibet and the Pacific. We know they gave Tibetans the genetic mutation that allows them to survive at high altitudes. But the only physical evidence we had of them was a few teeth and a pinky bone found in a cave in Siberia. We had no idea what they looked like. The analysis of the Harbin skull suggests that Dragon Man and the Denisovans are likely the same lineage. The fossil record has finally caught up with the genetic record. We are looking at the face of the ghost. It turns out that while Neanderthals were ruling Europe, this massive, big-brained sister species was ruling East Asia. They were not primitive side characters. They were a parallel humanity, an alternative version of us that evolved to master the cold. While the Dragon Man discovery filled a gap in the family tree, another discovery in the Mediterranean filled a gap in the map. When we look at a map of the world today, We see the Aegean Sea as a barrier. It is a fractured landscape of water separating the landmass of Turkey, Anatolia, from the continent of Europe, Greece. There are hundreds of islands, Lesbos, Chios, Samos, scattered like stepping stones, but deep water lies between them. Because of this geography, archaeologists have always assumed that early humans could only cross into Europe if they had boats. This created a logical problem. If humans didn't invent seaworthy boats until relatively recently, how did early stone tool users get to places like Crete hundreds of thousands of years ago? In October 2025, a team from Hacettepe University and Ankara University solved the riddle. They weren't looking for shipwrecks, they were looking for a lost world. Surveying the coastline of the Ayvalık district in western Turkey, they found a collection of 138 stone tools scattered along the modern beach and the shallow intertidal zone. These weren't just random rocks, they were sophisticated tools made using the levallois technique, a specific method of knapping stone that is the signature of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. They date back to the Middle Paleolithic, roughly 300,000 to 50,000 years ago. Finding these tools right on the water's edge confirms a geological theory that changes everything we know about human migration. During the Pleistocene ice ages, massive amounts of the Earth's water were locked up in polar ice caps. Global sea levels were drastically lower, sometimes by more than 300 feet. If you lower the Aegean Sea by 300 feet, the water vanishes. The islands of Lesbos and Chios stop being islands. They become the tops of limestone mountains rising out of a vast grassy plain. The discovery at Ayvalık proves that the Aegean wasn't a moat, it was a superhighway. Early humans didn't need to invent boats to get to Europe. They walked. We can now reconstruct this lost landscape with haunting clarity. It wasn't a barren land bridge like the icy crossing between Russia and Alaska. It was a lush, fertile savanna. It was watered by great rivers that flowed out across the continental shelf. Paleo-environmental data tells us this plain was teeming with life. We have found fossils of pygmy elephants, giant deer, and hippopotamuses on the Greek islands. For decades, it was a mystery how hippos, animals that are terrible at swimming long distances in open ocean, got to the islands. The answer is simple. They didn't swim to islands. They grazed their way across the valley floor. The stone tools found by the Turkish team are the leftovers of hunting camps set up on the ridges overlooking this great plain. These people were sitting on the high ground, sharpening their cleavers and hand axes, watching herds of game move through the valley below. They lived there for thousands of years. The separation between East and West, between Asia and Europe, is a modern accident of geology. In the deep past, it was one continuous world. The tragedy of this landscape is how it ended. Around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, the glaciers melted. The sea returned. It was a slow-motion apocalypse. The rivers turned into estuaries, the valleys turned into bays, and the hills turned into islands. The people living there were forced to retreat to the high ground or move inland. The archaeological sites we are finding now on the beaches are just the very edge of their territory. The heart of their world, their main camps, their butchery sites, their rock shelters, lies deep underwater, drowned by the birth of the Aegean Sea. Together, Dragon Man and the Aegean tools tell us that our history is defined by how we adapt to a changing planet. In China, a separate species of human evolved a massive physical form to survive the crushing cold of the north. In the Mediterranean, our ancestors colonised a landscape that no longer exists, walking across a seabed that is now under hundreds of feet of salt water. We tend to think of the map of the world as permanent, but these discoveries remind us that geography is fluid. We are the survivors of a world that was colder, larger, and far more crowded with different kinds of humans than we ever imagined. For decades, the story of how humans populated the Americas was remarkably simple. It was the Clovis first model. The theory went like this. About 13,000 years ago, a corridor of ice-free land opened up between the massive glaciers covering Canada. A group of brave hunters crossed the Bering land bridge from Siberia, walked down this corridor, and rapidly spread across North and South America. They brought with them a distinct technology, the deadly fluted stone spear points known as Clovis points, and they used them to wipe out the megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, in a prehistoric blitzkrieg. It was a neat, tidy Hollywood movie of a theory. But in the last few years, that script has been shredded. We now know people were here much earlier. At White Sands, footprints date back 23,000 years. But knowing when they arrived is different from knowing how they lived. The old assumption was that these first Americans were eternal wanderers, restless nomads who never stayed in one place long enough to build anything more permanent than a campfire. In 2025, a discovery in the high desert of New Mexico shattered that assumption. At a site called Gypsum Overlook in the Tularosa Basin, archaeologists unearthed something that wasn't supposed to exist: architecture. The site dates to 8,800 years ago. This is the early Archaic period, a time of massive environmental upheaval. The Ice Age was ending. The lush wetlands of the southwest were drying up, turning into the arid dune fields we see today. The megafauna were dead or dying. The conventional wisdom was that humans reacted to this chaos by becoming hypermobile, constantly moving to find dwindling resources. But the people at Gypsum Overlook did the opposite. They dug in. The team found the remains of substantial engineered homes. These weren't flimsy windbreaks. The builders had excavated shallow basins into the earth to create semi-subterranean floors. This is a brilliant adaptation to the desert climate. The earth provides natural insulation, keeping the home cool during the scorching days and warm during the freezing nights. Around the perimeter, post holes indicated a sturdy superstructure of wood and brush. Inside, the sophistication continued. The hearths were not just open fires, they were thermal engines. The builders lined the fire pits with specific types of stone that had high thermal mass. These stones would absorb the heat of the fire and radiate it slowly back into the room long after the flames died down, acting like a prehistoric radiator. This discovery fundamentally changes our view of early archaic society. You don't build a house like that if you are leaving tomorrow. These structures imply sedentism, the practice of staying in one place. It suggests that 8,800 years ago, people were already organising their labour, gathering construction materials, and planning for the future. They weren't just reacting to the climate, they were engineering their own microclimates. They were settling down, creating a sense of home in a landscape that was rapidly becoming hostile. But while archaeology was rewriting the lifestyle of the North, genetics was revealing a much darker mystery in the South. In November 2025, a massive study published in Nature unveiled a secret hidden in the DNA of ancient South Americans. An international team analysed the genomes of 238 ancient individuals from Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, spanning 10,000 years of history. As they ran the sequences, a strange signal emerged from the data. In the Pampas region of central Argentina, a vast fertile grassland similar to the Great Plains, they found a ghost lineage. This is a genetic signature that matches no known modern indigenous group. It represents a branch of the human family tree that split off from the main wave of migration thousands of years ago, and then evolved in complete isolation. The geography makes this baffling. The Pampas is open country. It is easy to cross. Usually in landscapes like this, people mix, they trade, they marry, they migrate. Genes flow like water across the plains. But this group didn't mix. The data shows that for nearly 5,000 years, longer than the entire history of the Roman Empire, this population remained genetically distinct. They lived on an island in the middle of a sea of grass. Archaeologically, we know a bit about them. They were highly adapted hunter-gatherers. In the early years, they hunted the last of the giant ground sloths and the American horse. We find their distinctive fish-tail projectile points buried with the bones of these monsters. Later, as the climate dried, they adapted to hunt the guanaco, a wild llama, and the rhea, a giant flightless bird. They invented the boleadoras, stone balls on cords thrown to entangle the legs of running animals. They buried their dead with complex rituals, painting the bones with red ochre, signalling a deep spiritual life. But despite their resilience, they were cut off. They lived alongside the rising civilizations of the Andes and the Amazon, yet they remained apart. And then, around 1,000 years ago, they vanished. The genetic signal disappears from the record. In the centuries just before the Europeans arrived, the DNA of the region changes completely. New lineages from the north sweep in. We don't know exactly what happened. Did the climate shift again, allowing invaders to push into the grasslands? Did a new disease wipe them out? Or were they violently displaced? By the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, the people they met were genetically different from the ghost lineage. The people who had hunted the ground sloths were gone. This discovery adds a haunting layer of tragedy to the history of the Americas. We often think of the European conquest as the only major demographic collapse in the continent's history. But the ghost lineage proves that there were earlier, silent extinctions. Entire peoples with their own languages, songs, myths and memories flourished for 5 millennia and then blinked out of existence, leaving nothing behind but a unique sequence of nucleotides in the dust of their bones. Combining gypsum overlook and the ghost lineage creates a new complex portrait of the pre-Columbian world. It wasn't a simple, linear filling of an empty map. It was a dynamic, dangerous and diverse process. In the deserts of New Mexico, people were mastering architecture and settling down thousands of years earlier than we thought. In the grasslands of Argentina, distinct populations were carving out isolated niches, thriving for millennia before disappearing into the void. The New World was actually very old, filled with successful experiments in living that we are only just beginning to understand. The first Americans were not just travellers passing through. They were architects and survivors, building worlds that have been lost to time, waiting for us to find the blueprints in the sand and the blood. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest has been the subject of a specific kind of myth. To the Western imagination, it was a counterfeit paradise, a place that looked lush and abundant but was actually a green desert. The soil was too acidic, the nutrients too scarce, and the jungle too aggressive to support anything more than small, scattered tribes of hunter-gatherers. Historians and archaeologists were certain that large-scale civilization was impossible there. The jungle would simply eat any attempt at urbanism. Legends of lost cities like El Dorado were dismissed as fever dreams of greedy conquistadors. But in 2025, the jungle finally admitted that the conquistadors were right about the cities, if wrong about the gold. The revelation came from the Upano Valley in eastern Ecuador. This is a region where the Andes Mountains crash down into the Amazon basin, a landscape of steep, rugged foothills choked by incredibly dense vegetation. Archaeologists have known for decades that something was there. Walking through the undergrowth, they would stumble upon pottery shards or unnatural-looking mounds hidden by ferns. But the forest was a veil. You could be standing 10 feet away from a massive pyramid and not see it because of the trees. To lift the veil, a team led by archaeologist Stephen Rostaing from the French National Centre for Scientific Research used LiDAR, light detection and ranging. This technology is essentially a laser scanner mounted on an aircraft. It fires billions of laser pulses at the ground. Some of those pulses hit the leaves, but some punch through gaps in the canopy and hit the earth. By filtering out the tree hits, you can digitally strip away the forest, leaving a naked 3D map of the ground. When the team processed the data for the Upano Valley, the results were not just surprising, they were paradigm-shifting. The lasers revealed a dense urban network spanning more than 100 square miles. This wasn't a collection of huts, it was a civilization. The scans exposed over 6,000 earthen platforms. These were rectangular foundations, roughly 40 feet wide and up to 10 feet high, built from the valley floor to provide dry, stable bases for wooden houses and temples. Because stone is rare in the Amazon, these people built with the only resource they had in abundance: mud. They were master geoengineers. They moved thousands of tons of soil, cutting down hills and filling in ravines to create a built environment that was entirely artificial. The scale is hard to grasp. The platforms were arranged around central plazas in precise geometric patterns, suggesting a highly organised society with strict civic planning. These weren't organic villages that grew randomly, they were designed. But the real shocker was the infrastructure connecting them. The LiDAR map looked like a circuit board. The settlements were linked by a complex web of straight, wide roads. The largest of these highways were 30 feet wide and stretched for miles. They cut through the landscape with an arrow-straight precision that implies a powerful central authority. You don't build a 30-foot wide highway for casual foot traffic. These roads were designed for heavy volume, suggesting a bustling trade network and constant interaction between tens of thousands of people. The space between the cities was equally engineered. The valley floor was crisscrossed by an extensive system of drainage canals and ditches. In a region where it rains relentlessly, managing water is the key to survival. These canals drain the excess water, turning the marshy valley floor into highly productive agricultural land. They cultivated maize, manioc, and sweet potatoes on an industrial scale. The researchers described the result as a garden city. It wasn't a dense urban core surrounded by wilderness like a European walled city. It was a low-density, continuous spread of urbanism, where the line between the city and the farm was blurred. It was a green urbanism perfectly adapted to the tropical environment. The chronology of this civilization is equally impressive. The region was occupied by two distinct cultures, the Kilamopi and later the Upano. The city building began around 500 BC, roughly the same time as the Roman Republic was founded, and lasted until around 600 AD. That means this society thrived for over 1,000 years. The population estimates are staggering. Based on the density of the platforms, researchers believe the Upano Valley was home to at least 10,000 people, and possibly as many as 30,000 at its peak. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the population of Roman London. This means that while Romans were walking on cobblestones in Britain, people in the Amazon were walking on engineered earthen highways in a city just as large. This discovery destroys the pristine wilderness myth of the Amazon. It proves that the rainforest is not an untouched Eden. It is an overgrown garden. The landscape was shaped, pruned, and engineered by human hands for millennia. The only reason we didn't see it is because they built with earth, and when the people died or left, the jungle simply grew back over their work. The Upano discovery is likely just the beginning. The Amazon is vast, and we have LiDAR scanned only a tiny fraction of it. As the technology improves and becomes cheaper, we are almost certainly going to find that the Upano Valley was not an anomaly. It was likely part of a continental network of complex societies that lived, traded, and warred across the basin. This realization forces us to confront a humbling truth. We often think of advanced civilizations as those that build with stone and iron, materials that last. But the Upano people built a complex, sustainable civilization out of mud and plants. They mastered one of the most difficult environments on Earth without destroying it. Their ruins are not piles of rubble. They are the landscape itself. The hills we see today are their pyramids. The flat plains are their farms. They didn't vanish, they just melted back into the earth they came from. The implications for modern conservation are profound. Indigenous people have been saying for centuries that the forest is an ancestral home, filled with the presence of the past. Science has finally caught up. The Amazon is not just a biological treasure, it is an archaeological one. Every time a bulldozer clears a patch of forest for cattle grazing or soy farming, it isn't just destroying trees. It is potentially erasing the last traces of lost cities that we haven't even named yet. The green ocean of the Amazon is hiding leviathans, and we are racing against time to map them before they are gone forever. If the Amazon was hiding its cities under a canopy of green, the jungles of Guatemala were hiding something even more surprising, a plumber's masterpiece. For over a century, Maya archaeology has been dominated by the Classic period, the era from roughly 250 AD to 900 AD. This was the time of the superstars: Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque. It was the age of the towering stone temples, the intricate hieroglyphic stairways, and the divine kings who waged endless wars for dominance. Because the ruins from this period are so massive and visible, they sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The era before it, the pre-classic, was generally viewed as a dress rehearsal. We assumed the Maya of 800 BC were simple farmers living in villages, slowly figuring out how to be a civilization. In May 2025, that assumption was washed away by a discovery that rewrites the timeline of engineering in the Americas. Working deep in the Mirador Calakmul karst basin of northern Guatemala, a joint team of Guatemalan and Slovak researchers uncovered a massive, integrated urban complex. This wasn't just one site, it was a triad of cities: Los Aquiotes, Petnal, and Cambriel, linked together into a single political and economic engine. And they date back to the Middle Pre-Classic, around 800 BC. The scale alone is enough to make heads spin. At Los Aquiotes, the ceremonial centre covers 6 square miles. At Petnal, a pyramid rises over 100 feet into the air. Finding a 100-foot pyramid from 800 BC is like finding a skyscraper in medieval London. It proves that the social organisation required to mobilise massive amounts of labour existed 1,000 years earlier than we thought. But the real revolution wasn't the stone, it was the water. The Peten jungle is a paradox. It is lush and green, but for humans, it is a hydrological nightmare. It is a seasonal desert. For 6 months, the rains are torrential, turning the landscape into a swamp. For the other 6 months, it is bone dry. There are no major rivers in this part of the basin. The water table is too deep to reach with primitive wells. To survive here, let alone build a city, you have to solve the water problem. You have to capture the deluge when it falls and store it for the drought, while simultaneously making sure your city doesn't wash away in a mudslide. We used to think the Maya didn't master this complex hydraulic engineering until the Classic period, driven by population pressure. But at the site of Cambriel, the team found a sophisticated system that destroys that theory. They uncovered a canal system lined with stucco, a durable waterproof plaster made from burnt limestone. This wasn't a crude ditch, it was a piece of high-tech infrastructure. The canals ran for hundreds of feet, connecting massive reservoirs at the top of the city to the residential and agricultural areas below. The plaster lining prevented erosion and seepage, ensuring that every drop of precious water was controlled. Creating this much plaster is an industrial feat in itself. You have to quarry limestone, burn it in massive kilns at high temperatures, consuming huge amounts of wood, and then mix it perfectly. To use it just to line a drainage ditch implies a society with immense resources and a deep understanding of chemical engineering. The system at Cambriel was designed to manage sanitation and drainage. It kept the elite precincts clean and dry during the monsoon. It functioned as both a storm drain and a water supply network. The complexity of the gradients, the slope of the channels, shows that these early engineers understood fluid dynamics. They knew exactly how to move water from point A to point B using gravity alone. This discovery proves that the Maya were terraforming their environment 3,000 years ago. They weren't just living in the jungle, they were turning the jungle into a machine. They had cracked the code of survival in the Peten long before Rome was even a village of mud huts on the Tiber. The cultural richness matches the engineering. At Los Aquiotes, the team unearthed 2 anthropomorphic sculptures. Carved from stone, they depict an ancestral couple, a man and a woman. These likely represent the founders of the city's ruling lineage. This is physical evidence of the ancestor worship cults that would become the backbone of Maya religion for the next 2 millennia. They also found an E group, a specific architectural arrangement of temples used as an astronomical observatory. An E group consists of a western pyramid facing a raised platform with 3 structures on the east. If you stand on the western pyramid, the sun rises over the northern eastern structure on the summer solstice, the southern structure on the winter solstice, and the central structure on the equinoxes. The presence of an E group at 800 BC confirms that the Maya had already formalised their calendar and their relationship with the cosmos. They weren't just looking at the sky, they were building giant stone computers to track it. They needed this astronomical precision to regulate their agriculture, to know exactly when the rains would come and when to plant the corn. In the Maya world, time was not abstract. It was a survival tool. The connectivity between these sites is the final nail in the coffin of the simple village theory. The cities were linked by Sac-Biob, singular Sac-Bi, white roads. These raised causeways, paved with limestone plaster, cut through the jungle connecting the urban centres. You don't build intercity highways unless you have a unified economy and a centralised government. The urban triangle of Los Achiotes, Petnal and Cambriel functioned as a state. This discovery forces us to rethink the trajectory of civilization in the Americas. The classic Maya, the ones who built Tikal and collapsed in the famous 9th century mystery, didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were the inheritors of a deep, sophisticated tradition. They stood on the shoulders of these pre-classic giants. The jungle of Guatemala is often called a green ocean, a vast expanse that swallows history. But thanks to this expedition, we now know that this ocean hides leviathans. The builders of Cambriel were not primitive ancestors warming up for the main event. They were master engineers who tamed one of the most difficult environments on Earth. They looked at a seasonal swamp and saw a canvas. They turned mud into stone, burned rock into plaster, and channeled the rain to build a civilization that was fully formed, powerful, and brilliant right at the very beginning of its story. As the team continues to map the canals and clear the temples, they are revealing the blueprint of a lost world, a world where water was wealth, and the jungle was a garden managed by the hands of masters. While the Maya were turning the jungle into a hydraulic machine, a very different kind of revolution was happening halfway across the world on the windswept grasslands of the Eurasian steppe. For generations, historians have told a specific story about the steppe. It was the highway of the nomads. The traditional view is that the people here, the ancestors of the Scythians, the Huns and the Mongols, lived in yurts and temporary camps. They moved with the seasons, grazing their herds of cattle and horses. They were masters of mobility, but they didn't build cities. They didn't stay in one place long enough to leave behind anything more than burial mounds, kurgans. But in November 2025, a discovery in northeastern Kazakhstan completely shattered that idea. An international team led by researchers from University College London and Torygyrov University published the first detailed survey of a site known as Semyaka, or the City of Seven Ravines. The site sits on a high promontory overlooking the Irtysh River. The discovery actually began with Cold War spy satellites. In the 1960s, Soviet Corona satellites snapped high-resolution photos of the Earth to track military movements. When these images were declassified decades later, archaeologists noticed faint geometric shadows in the grass of the Kazakh steppe. They looked too straight to be natural, but it wasn't until 2025, using advanced drones and magnetometry, an X-ray for the ground, that the team revealed the truth. Semyaka wasn't a campsite. It was a sprawling Bronze Age metropolis covering nearly 350 acres. To put that in perspective, it is 3 times larger than any other site from the same period found in the region. It dates back to around 1600 BC, the same time as the palaces of Mycenaean Greece and the height of the Shang dynasty in China. But unlike the Greeks or Chinese who built with stone and brick, the people of Semyaka built with the earth itself. They constructed massive earthen platforms and walls that, over millennia, melted back into the landscape, hiding the city in plain sight. The scan results showed a highly planned city. The team mapped out 2 massive rows of rectangular, earthen mounds arranged in a strict grid. You don't get a grid by accident. A grid implies a central authority, a government or a king who planned the city before a single brick was laid. At the centre lies a huge building, oriented east-west, likely a palace or temple, proving that this society had a hierarchy of leaders and followers. But the real game changer was the dirt itself. In the southeastern sector of the city, the soil was filled with slag, broken crucibles and waste rock. This was a dedicated industrial zone. Analysis confirmed that the people of Semiarca were running a massive factory for the production of tin bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. Copper is common, but tin is rare. The nearest major sources of tin are in the Altai Mountains and central Kazakhstan, hundreds of miles away. This proves that Semiarca was a major hub in a supply chain that stretched across the continent. These nomads were importing raw materials from distant mountains, processing them in an industrial district, and exporting finished weapons and tools to tribes all over Eurasia. This trade network existed more than 1,000 years before the famous Silk Road. The chemical analysis of the metal shows they were using a complex method called co-smelting, mixing minerals to create high-quality alloys with up to 12% tin content. This isn't something a hobbyist does. This suggests a class of professional metalworkers who did nothing else, specialists supported by the food grown by the rest of the community. Semiarca proves that the nomadic tribes were not primitive people who lived in tents because they didn't know how to build walls. They had the knowledge and the skill to build massive, organised industrial cities whenever they wanted to. They just usually chose not to. But at Semiarca, for reasons we are still trying to understand, they stopped wandering and built a powerhouse. Leaving the industrial smoke of the steppe, we travel west to the Atlantic coast of Spain, where another civilization was stepping out of the shadows. For centuries, historians have searched for Tartessos. Located in southern Spain, this civilization was the first powerful state in the western Mediterranean. The ancient Greeks wrote of it with awe, describing it as a kingdom of immense wealth, where ships used silver for their anchors. But Tartessos vanished around 2,500 years ago, leading some to speculate it was the inspiration for Atlantis. Archaeologically, Tartessos was frustrating because it seemed faceless. It was believed to be an aniconic culture, meaning they did not represent their gods or people in human form. We had their jewellery and weapons, but we had no idea what they looked like. In 2025, at the site of Casas del Turuñuelo, that changed. A team from the Spanish National Research Council unearthed the first sculpted human faces of the Tartessos culture. Buried in the debris of a massive adobe sanctuary, they found 5 stone busts. These were not crude effigies, they were sophisticated, naturalistic portraits. 2 of the busts depict women adorned with elaborate, oversized earrings known as aracadas. These intricate gold pieces have been found in hoards before, but seeing them carved on a statue places them in context, signifying the immense status of the women, likely goddesses or high priestesses. A third bust depicts a warrior in a crested helmet. These statues disprove the aniconic theory instantly. They show that Tartessos had a highly developed tradition of sculpture that rivaled the art of Greece and Phoenicia. The faces look indigenous. They are the faces of the Atlantic Bronze Age, finally staring back at us. But the context of the find is dark. Casas del Turuñuelo was the site of a massive ritual destruction. In the courtyard, archaeologists found the remains of a hecatomb, a mass sacrifice. More than 50 horses, cows, pigs and dogs were silenced in a single event. Horses were valuable assets. Silencing so many implies a ritual of supreme importance or desperation. After silencing them, the entire building was destroyed and deliberately buried under clay. This sealed the site perfectly, preserving the plaster on the walls and the stone faces of the gods. It suggests a civilization in crisis, perhaps facing invasion or climate collapse, attempting to appease the heavens or scorch the earth before the end came. Together, Semiarca and the Tartessian faces remind us that the map of the ancient world is still being drawn. In Kazakhstan, we found a factory city where we expected only tents. In Spain, we found the beautiful stone-carved faces of a people we thought were invisible. The ancients were not just surviving, they were building industries and carving their likenesses for eternity, leaving clues that are only now rising from the dust. In the genealogy of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, the golden age of the New Kingdom, there has always been a missing piece. We know the titans of this era well. We know Thutmose I, the conqueror who expanded the empire to the Euphrates. We know Hatshepsut, the woman who declared herself pharaoh and ruled with unprecedented power. And we know Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt, whose military genius cemented Egyptian dominance for a century. But trapped between these giants was a king who seemed to vanish into the background, Thutmose II. For more than a century, Egyptologists treated him as a placeholder. He was the frail husband of the ambitious Hatshepsut and the father of the mighty Thutmose III. He ruled for perhaps 15 years, but his reign was defined by his relationships to the more famous figures around him. His mummy was found in 1881 in the famous royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, where priests had hidden the bodies of great kings to protect them from looters. But unlike his father or his son, his original tomb had never been found. He was the only pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, whose final resting place remained a blank spot on the map. That changed in 2025. In a discovery hailed as one of the most significant since Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, a joint Egyptian-British mission announced they had finally located the lost tomb of the missing pharaoh. Led by Dr. Piers Litherland of the New Kingdom Research Foundation, the team didn't find it in the main branch of the Valley of the Kings, where tourists flock today. They found it in the rugged, desolate cliffs of the Western Wadis, a place few visitors ever see. The detective work was brilliant. The team suspected that Thutmose II would not be buried alongside the later Ramesside kings in the main valley. They looked instead at the burial patterns of his family. The tombs of Thutmose III's wives had been found in the steep, treacherous ravines of the Wadi Gabanat el Khurud. It stood to reason that the father might be near the son's family. For years, the team battled the harsh terrain, clearing tons of limestone debris. Their perseverance paid off when they uncovered a rock-cut entrance buried for millennia. It was catalogued as Tomb C4. At first, the architecture was confusing. It was simpler than the sprawling tunnels of the later New Kingdom. Just a corridor descending into a burial chamber. But as they cleared the rubble, the evidence began to speak. They found fragments of plaster decoration depicting the Amduat, the ancient text that guided the pharaoh's soul through the 12 hours of the night. The walls would have once been brilliant with blue inscriptions and yellow stars, a map of the underworld. The smoking gun came in the form of stone. The team recovered a collection of alabaster vessels, jars used to hold sacred oils or perhaps the king's internal organs. When they cleaned the surface, they found the cartouche of Thutmose II. But they found something else too, a detail that changes our understanding of the power dynamics of the time. Inscribed alongside the king's name was the name of his great royal wife, Hatshepsut. History has often painted Hatshepsut as a usurper, a stepmother who seized power from the young Thutmose III after her husband's death. But the presence of her name on the funerary equipment of Thutmose II suggests a partnership. It shows Hatshepsut fulfilling her duties as the pious wife, preparing her husband for the afterlife with the finest goods the empire could provide. It implies that her rise to power may have been less of a coup and more of a calculated evolution that began while he was still alive. The discovery also answers why the tomb was lost. The Western Wadis are prone to violent flash floods. Shortly after the king was buried, a massive torrent of mud crashed into the tomb, smashing the wooden furniture and filling the chambers with concrete-like debris. In a way, this disaster was a blessing. While it destroyed the organic beauty of the tomb, it also sealed it, protecting the remaining stone artefacts from the tomb robbers, who stripped the rest of the valley bare. Leaving the silence of the Western Wadis, we travel to the rose-red city of Petra in Jordan, where another royal mystery was waiting beneath the feet of millions of tourists. The treasury, or Al-Khazna, is the face of Petra. Carved directly into the pink sandstone cliff, it is a global icon, famously appearing as the resting place of the Holy Grail in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For decades, scholars debated its function. Was it a temple to the goddess Isis, a treasury for taxes, or a tomb? The name Al-Khazna comes from a Bedouin legend that an Egyptian pharaoh hid his gold in the stone urn at the top of the facade. You can still see bullet marks on the urn where tribesmen shot at it, hoping to shatter it and release the gold. But the real treasure wasn't up high, It was down low. In late 2024, leading into the 2025 season, a team led by Dr. Piers Paul Kriesman returned to the site armed with ground-penetrating radar. They scanned the plaza directly in front of the treasury. The radar revealed strong anomalies, voids that didn't match the geology. Permission was granted to excavate, a rare occurrence at such a protected World Heritage site. As the team dug beneath the facade, they uncovered the entrance to a buried tomb. Unlike most tombs in Petra, which were emptied by raiders centuries ago, this chamber was pristine. Inside, they found the complete skeletal remains of 12 individuals. This discovery confirms the theory that the treasury was a royal mausoleum. Based on pottery and sediment analysis, the tomb dates to the reign of King Aretas IV, 9 BC 40 AD. Aretas IV was the greatest of the Nabatean kings, presiding over Petra's golden age. His daughter was married to Herod Antipas, linking this family directly to biblical history. Finding complete skeletons in Petra is incredibly rare. The sandstone is acidic and the humidity usually disintegrates bone. But these 12 individuals were preserved. This allows scientists to analyse their DNA for the first time, potentially revealing the genetic origins of the Nabatean royalty. We can finally ask, who were the people who built this city? Were they local Arabs, or did they have genetic links to the wider Hellenistic world? In a bizarre twist of fate, one of the skeletons was found clutching a ceramic chalice. The shape of the vessel bore a striking resemblance to the prop used as the Holy Grail in the Indiana Jones movie shot at this exact location. It was a coincidence, but a poetic one. The real grail of archaeology isn't a magical cup. It's the data that allows us to reconstruct the lives of the people who vanished. Thutmose II and the 12 skeletons of Petra remind us that even at the most famous sites on Earth, places visited by millions, history is still hiding under our feet. We walk over kings and queens every day, unaware that they are waiting for the right radar sweep or the right shovel to bring them back into the light. We tend to think of the desert as a place of silence, a landscape of emptiness where hermits go to hide and prophets go to pray. But the Judean desert is a place of secrets, and not all of them are holy. It is a rugged, tortured landscape of limestone canyons and sheer cliffs dropping down to the Dead Sea, the lowest point on Earth. For thousands of years, this terrain has been the ultimate refuge for rebels, outlaws, and zealots. It is where David hid from Saul, where the Maccabees fought the Greeks, and where the Dead Sea Scrolls were stashed in caves to save them from Roman fires. Because of this history, archaeologists are constantly scanning the cliffs, usually looking for more scrolls. They rappel down into crevices, hoping to find jars of ancient text. But in March 2025, a team from the Israel Antiquities Authority found something completely different. They weren't looking inside the rock, they found something built on it. High in a cliff face, in an area almost impossible to reach without technical climbing gear, they discovered a structure that defied explanation. It wasn't a natural cave, it was a constructed monument, a small step-sided pyramid built directly into the vertical rock. The pyramid stands about 10 feet high, constructed from local limestone blocks that were carefully cut and fitted. It appears to be a nephesh, a memorial marker traditionally placed over a grave or used to commemorate a significant event in Second Temple architecture. We see similar structures in Jerusalem, like the tomb of Zechariah, but finding one here, hanging off a cliff miles from any settlement, was baffling. Who hauls cut stone up a precipice to build a monument no one will ever see? When the team excavated the base, the mystery deepened. There was no body. Instead, hidden within the stonework in a deliberate hollow, was a cache. The artefacts date back to the Ptolemaic period, roughly the 3rd century BC. This was a time of Game of Thrones level chaos in the ancient Middle East. Following the death of Alexander the Great, his empire fractured. The Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria fought a series of brutal wars. The Syrian Wars for control of the Levant. Judea was the buffer zone, the blood-soaked highway between these two superpowers. The cache contained a hoard of silver tetradrachms, high-value coins minted in Alexandria and Tyre. These coins were pristine, suggesting they were minted, transported, and hidden without ever entering circulation. Alongside the silver were weapons, iron spearheads, arrowheads, and the remains of a composite bow. The bow is a rare find. Made of wood, horn, and sinew, these complex weapons usually rot away. Its preservation here is due to the extreme aridity of the desert. But the most valuable find was the paper. Tucked inside a sealed ceramic jar was a bundle of papyrus documents. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are religious, these appear to be military records. Written in Greek and Aramaic, they detail supply lines, troop movements, and payments to mercenaries. They mention the fortress of the cliff and the watchers of the salt sea. This discovery forces us to rethink the history of the Judean desert. It wasn't just a place for monks, it was a militarized frontier. The pyramid likely served as a marker for a secret outpost or a rebel stronghold, a symbol of authority visible only to those who knew where to look. The cache represents the treasury of a military unit, perhaps Jewish mercenaries fighting for the Egyptians or a local resistance group. The fact that the money was never spent and the weapons never retrieved implies a violent end. The garrison was likely overrun or forced to flee, leaving their payroll behind in the hope of returning. They never did. From the dry heat of the cliffs, we plunge into the cool, silent waters of the Mediterranean, where another mystery was waiting. This one made of crystal. Canopus was once the Las Vegas of antiquity. Located just a few miles east of Alexandria, it was a city of wild contradictions. It was famous for its decadent festivals, where pilgrims came to be healed by the gods and wealthy Alexandrians came to lose themselves in pleasure. It was the gateway to Egypt, a thriving port filled with temples and villas. And then, in the 8th century AD, it vanished. The ground beneath it liquefied during a massive earthquake, and the entire city slid into the sea. For over 1,000 years, Canopus was a ghost story. But in August 2025, the silt of the Nile Delta revealed one of its greatest secrets. A team of underwater archaeologists, diving in the gloomy depths of Abu Qir Bay, uncovered a colossal statue buried in the sediment. It was a sphinx. But this wasn't the typical limestone or sandstone monument. This creature was carved from quartzite, one of the hardest stones in the ancient world. As divers brushed away the mud, the sunlight filtering down from the surface caught the stone, revealing a pristine, polished surface. The Sphinx bears the cartouche of Ramses II, the most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Its discovery in a city that peaked more than 1,000 years after Ramses died suggests it was an heirloom, an ancient ancestor brought to Canopus to lend authority to a new temple. Finding a quartzite statue of this size underwater is incredibly rare. Quartzite is notoriously difficult to carve, requiring tools and skills that were lost for centuries. To find one resting on the seafloor is a haunting reminder of the wealth Canopus once commanded. But the Sphinx was not alone. Alongside the Colossus, the team recovered a trove of ritual artifacts that shed light on the city's most famous event, the mysteries of Osiris. Canopus was the final destination of a massive waterborne procession. Every year, priests would sail a statue of the god Osiris down the canals from the neighbouring city of Thonis Heracleion, simulating the god's journey to the underworld. The artefacts recovered this year provide the first physical evidence of the secret rituals performed inside the temple walls. Divers retrieved ceremonial ladles made of bronze and silver, used to pour libations. They found offering tables still laden with the petrified remains of food. Most intriguingly, they found Osiris beds, stone or gold moulds shaped like the silhouette of the god. During the festival, priests would fill these moulds with soil and grain. They would water the god until the grain sprouted, creating a living green image of Osiris. It was a powerful symbol of resurrection, mirroring the annual flooding of the Nile. The discovery highlights the duality of Canopus. While priests were conducting solemn rites inside, the streets outside were hosting a non-stop party. Ancient writers described the canal to Canopus as a scene of debauchery, with flute players and dancers performing on boats packed with revellers. The Sphinx of Ramses II likely witnessed scenes that would have shocked his conservative New Kingdom court. The condition of the Sphinx tells the story of the city's end. It was found toppled on its side, half buried in chaotic debris. It wasn't carefully dismantled, it was thrown down by the earth itself. The liquid mud that swallowed the city also sealed it, protecting the stone from erosion. In the desert, a pyramid marks a lost garrison. In the ocean, a sphinx marks a drowned temple. Both are monuments to the suddenness of catastrophe. One day you are a soldier counting silver in a cliff. The next, you are gone. One day you are a priest watering a god of grain. The next, the ground turns to liquid and the sea rushes in. Archaeology is the science of what remains after the disaster. We have explored cities swallowed by the jungle and garrisons hidden in cliffs. But perhaps the greatest archaeological frontier of the 21st century isn't a place on a map. It is the frontier of virtual archaeology, using physics and artificial intelligence to read the unreadable and see the invisible. In 2025, this technology achieved its moon landing moment in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. When Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it destroyed Pompeii with ash and pumice. But it destroyed the neighbouring town of Herculaneum in a different way. Herculaneum was hit by a pyroclastic flow, a superheated avalanche of gas and mud that sealed the town in an airtight tomb of rock. This unique preservation saved something that was lost everywhere else in the ancient world: a library. In the 18th century, tunnellers discovered the Villa of the Papyri, named after the hundreds of scrolls found inside. But there was a problem. The heat of the volcano had carbonised the scrolls, turning them into lumps of charcoal that looked exactly like burnt logs. For centuries, scholars tried to open them. Every attempt ended in disaster. The carbonised layers were so fragile they crumbled into dust the moment they were touched. We knew we held the only surviving library from antiquity, but we couldn't read a single word of it without destroying it. The solution came from Dr. Brent Seals, a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky. He realised that if you couldn't physically unroll the scrolls, you had to unroll them digitally. His team used a particle accelerator, a synchrotron, to scan the scrolls with high-energy X-rays. This created a detailed 3D model of the inside of the charcoal lumps, showing the layers of papyrus wrapped like a jelly roll. But there was still a problem. The ink used by the Romans was made of carbon. The paper was carbon. On a standard X-ray, the ink was invisible. It was black ink on black paper. To solve this, Seals launched the Vesuvius Challenge. He released the data to the public and offered a cash prize to anyone who could train an AI to see the invisible ink. The theory was that the ink, even if chemically identical to the paper, would leave a tiny texture, a crackle pattern, that a machine learning algorithm could detect. In 2025, the floodgates opened. After a proof of concept success in 2024, the technology moved to production. A team of students trained an AI that didn't just read a word, it read entire columns of text. The scroll they decoded is a previously unknown philosophical work by Philodemus of Gadara, the resident Epicurean philosopher of the villa. The text is a direct window into the mind of the Roman elite. Philodemus discusses the nature of pleasure, arguing against his rivals, the Stoics. He debates whether luxury foods and music are good in themselves, or only good because they are rare. As in the case of food, one passage reads, "We do not immediately believe that things that are scarce are absolutely more pleasant than those that are abundant." It is a critique of luxury, written in a villa of immense luxury. But the philosophy is secondary to the miracle. We are reading a book that was burned 2,000 years ago. The implications are staggering. Most of the Villa of the Papyri is still unexcavated. Archaeologists believe the main library, which would contain lost Latin masterpieces, is still down there. If we can find it, we now have the technology to read the lost plays of Sophocles, the missing books of Livy, or the lost history of the Etruscans. While AI was decoding the philosophy of the elite in Herculaneum, traditional excavation in Pompeii was revealing the psychology of the elite in a room that terrified the world. In April 2025, archaeologists working in a sector known as Regio 9 uncovered a banquet hall unlike any other. Roman dining rooms are usually bright, painted in Pompeian red or sunny yellow. This room was painted entirely black. Dubbed the Black Room, it is a space of profound, almost Gothic beauty. The black walls were a practical choice to hide the soot from oil lamps, but they also served a dramatic purpose. Against the pitch-black background, the artists painted scenes of intense colour and emotion. The frescoes depict characters from the Trojan War, but not the usual battle scenes. They focus on psychological tension. On one wall, Helen of Troy meets Paris. It is the moment before the abduction that would destroy a civilization. Helen is not a pawn. She is depicted as thoughtful, weighing her destiny. On another wall is Cassandra. The priestess cursed to see the future, but never be believed. She sits with the god Apollo, her face shadowed by the knowledge of the doom coming for her city. It is a haunting image to find in Pompeii, a city that was living on borrowed time, ignoring the tremors that signalled its own end. The room allows us to reconstruct the sensory experience of a Roman feast. Imagine the space at night, the black walls disappearing in the gloom, the oil lamps flickering, making the figures of Helen and Cassandra seem to float like ghosts. The guests reclining on couches would look at these images and debate fate and free will. The floor was a stark white mosaic, creating a visual shock, a field of light in a room of darkness. The Black Room captures the precise moment the music stopped. Adjacent to the hall, archaeologists found piles of construction materials: lime, tough blocks, roof tiles. The owner was renovating. He was investing in his property, planning for the future. The workmen had likely just put down their tools for the day when the mountain exploded. These two discoveries, the scroll and the room, are linked by the volcano. Vesuvius was a destroyer, but it was also a preserver. It froze the ancient world in mid-sentence. In Herculaneum, it saved the books. In Pompeii, it saved the art. And now, thanks to our own technology, we are finally finishing the conversation that was interrupted in 79 AD. We are reading their philosophy and seeing their fears, realising that the people who lived under the volcano were not statues in a museum. They were people who loved books, threw dinner parties, and worried about the future, right up until the moment the sky turned black. While the fires of Vesuvius preserved history by burning it, sometimes the best way to save the past is to seal it away, tightly. In 2025, two discoveries demonstrated the power of the hermetic seal. One engineered by human hands to keep the world out, and one created by the crushing physics of the deep ocean. The first was found in the heart of Budapest, Hungary. Today, Budapest is a modern capital, but beneath its streets lies the Roman city of Aquincum, once a critical fortress on the Danube frontier. In November 2025, archaeologists excavating in the Abuda district hit stone. They uncovered a limestone sarcophagus dating back to the 3rd century AD. Finding a sarcophagus in a Roman province is rare, but not unheard of. What made this find exceptional was the seal. Most Roman tombs were looted centuries ago. Grave robbers is one of the world's oldest professions. But this lid was still clamped shut. The iron clamps had rusted but held firm. Crucially, the seam between the lid and the base was filled with a thick layer of lead. The lead acted as a gasket. It created a hermetic seal that prevented water, air, and insects from entering the coffin for 1,700 years. The archaeologists realised they had found a time capsule. When they lifted the lid, they found the skeleton of a young woman. Thanks to the lead seal, the preservation inside was miraculous. Organic materials that usually rot away within decades had survived. Resting near her head were two glass vessels known as unguentaria, bottles for perfume or oil. In most digs, Roman glass is shattered into 1,000 shards by the weight of the earth. These were perfect, shimmering in the light. But the real treasure was invisible to the naked eye until microscopic analysis began. The team found traces of textiles. The lead seal had created an environment stable enough for fragments of fabric to endure. They identified threads of gold woven into a material that had otherwise disintegrated. This implies the woman was buried in a garment of immense luxury, likely a silk or fine wool tunic embroidered with gold. In a frontier town constantly threatened by barbarian tribes, this woman went to her grave wearing a fortune. They also found 140 bronze coins. In Roman tradition, you place a coin in the mouth of the dead to pay Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. Finding 140 suggests a variation of the ritual, perhaps a purse buried with her to ensure she travelled in style. The lead coffin, the gold threads, the pristine glass. It is an intimate snapshot of a wealthy family trying to buy eternity for their daughter, using the best technology they had to protect her from the decay of the earth. From the sealed stone of Hungary, we move to the sealed darkness of the abyss. In March 2025, the French Navy was conducting a sonar survey off the coast of Ramatuelle in southern France. They were operating in deep water, nearly 8,400 feet down. At this depth, the Mediterranean is a world of total darkness, near freezing temperatures and crushing pressure. It is a place where biology slows down and history stands still. Their drone, an autonomous underwater vehicle, AUV, picked up an anomaly. It wasn't a rock, it was a ship. This is the wreck of Camarat 4. It is a merchant vessel from the 16th century, and it is the deepest wooden shipwreck ever discovered in French waters. Finding a wooden ship from the 1500s is rare. In shallow water, wood is eaten by shipworms, teredo navalis, or smashed by storms. But in the abyss, the oxygen levels are lower, and the wood-boring worms are less active. The ship is preserved in a state of suspended animation. The images returned by the drone are haunting. The hull is sitting upright on the sediment, as if it is still sailing. The ribs and planking are clearly visible. The masts have collapsed, likely snapped during the violent descent, but the main structure is coherent. This is a time capsule from the Renaissance. This ship sailed the same seas as the fleets of Suleiman the Magnificent and the merchant navies of Venice. It was a workhorse of the Mediterranean economy, likely carrying grain, wine or oil. Because it sits so deep, it has never been looted. It is pristine. For archaeologists, this is the Holy Grail. The cargo hold is likely still packed with the goods it was carrying when it went down. It might hold amphorae of wine, bales of raw silk, ingots of metal, or the personal possessions of the crew, their tools, their coins, their clay pipes. These everyday objects are usually scattered or stolen in shallow wrecks. Here they will be exactly where they fell 500 years ago. The depth presents a massive challenge. At 8,400 feet, human divers are impossible. You would be crushed instantly. Excavation must be done entirely by robots, ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, with delicate manipulator arms. The French Department of Underwater Archaeological Research is planning a mission not to raise the ship, the wood is too fragile, but to sample the cargo. A single coin or a maker's mark on a piece of pottery could pin the wreck to a specific year. Camarat 4 offers a unique opportunity to study the middle class of maritime history. We know a lot about the great warships and royal galleys. We know less about the anonymous merchant ships that kept the economy running. This ship was a business venture that ended in disaster. It was likely blown off course by a mistral storm, the violent wind that sweeps down from the Alps, and driven out into the deep water where it foundered. The sarcophagus in Budapest and the ship in the Mediterranean share a common theme: the pursuit of permanence. The Romans used lead to seal their dead against the rot of the grave. The sailors of the Renaissance built ships of oak to withstand the waves. Both ultimately failed in their original purpose. The woman decomposed and the ship sank. But in their failure, they succeeded in a different way. The lead and the deep water acted as time machines, delivering these people and their possessions to us, untouched by the centuries that passed between their time and ours. We end our journey with the most frustrating category of archaeological discovery: the things that refuse to explain themselves. Sometimes we find objects that are so perfectly preserved, so intricate, and so undeniably human that they demand an answer. But the people who made them left no instructions. They are the black boxes of history. In 2025, two such discoveries, one made of bronze in England and one made of fibre in Australia, challenged the limits of our understanding. The first was unearthed in a muddy field in the village of Norton Disney, Lincolnshire. A group of volunteer archaeologists was digging a trench when they struck metal. It wasn't a rusty nail or a coin. It was a shape that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie or a Dungeons and Dragons game. It was a Roman dodecahedron. A dodecahedron is a geometric shape with 12 pentagonal faces. This object is made of a copper alloy, bronze, roughly the size of a grapefruit. Each of its 12 faces has a circular hole of a different diameter, and each corner is studded with a small ball-shaped knob. It is hollow, complex, and beautifully cast. The Norton Disney find is significant because it is huge, one of the largest ever found in Britain. And it is pristine. It looks like it came out of the mould yesterday. But the real story is the silence. This is not the first one we have found. There are about 130 known examples across the Roman Empire, mostly in Northern Europe, Gaul, Germany, Britain. Yet in the millions of words of Roman literature, in all the military manuals, the histories, the poems, the letters, there is not a single mention of them. We don't know what they were called. We don't know what they were for. The Norton Disney discovery has reignited a 200-year-old debate. Was it a weapon? A rangefinder for artillery? Unlikely, because the holes are not standardised. Every dodecahedron is different, which would make a measuring tool useless. Was it a knitting spool for making gloves? Technically possible, but why make a knitting spool out of high-status, expensive bronze when wood would do? The context of this new find offers a clue. It was found in a pit filled with Roman pottery, dating to the 3rd or 4th century AD. It wasn't thrown away, it was placed. This suggests it was a ritual object. In the Gallo-Roman world, magic and superstition were everywhere. Perhaps these were fortune-telling devices used to cast lots. Perhaps the 12 sides represented the zodiac, or the months of the year. Or maybe they were masterpieces. Objects created by metalworkers to prove their skill. A geometric portfolio piece. The Norton Disney dodecahedron sits in a museum case today. A perfect geometric riddle. It mocks us. It reminds us that for all our AI and our scanners, there are cultural concepts that have vanished so completely, we don't even have the language to describe them. It is a beautiful, heavy lump of we don't know. From the heavy bronze of England, we travel to the fragile fibres of Australia, where another mystery was solved not by guessing, but by listening. In the sandstone hills of the Cape York Peninsula, a team led by the University of Western Australia and the Kuku Warra traditional owners excavated a rock shelter called Windmill Way. The cave is protected by a massive overhang, creating a dry microclimate that acts as a natural preservative. As they sifted the dust, they found something miraculous. Fibre. Usually organic technology, wood, leather, string. Rots away. This creates a Stone Age bias where we think Aboriginal history is defined by stone tools, because that's all that survives. But at Windmill Way, the team found over 500 fragments of ancient textiles dating back 1,700 years. This is the largest collection of ancient fibre artefacts ever found in the continent. They found fragments of dilly bags, woven carrying vessels that served as the backpacks of the ancient world. They found fishing nets, binding cords, and ceremonial items. The weave is intricate. Some bags were tight woven for carrying seeds. Others were open mesh for carrying shellfish. Microscopic analysis shows a deep knowledge of botany. The makers knew exactly which plants to harvest, how to strip the bark, and how to twist the fibres to create strong, durable, two-ply string. The knots used in the nets are identical to the knots used by modern fishermen. This is a technology that was perfected millennia ago and never needed to be improved. But the most poignant part of the discovery is the end of the timeline. The artefacts stop abruptly in 1874. This date coincides with the Palmer River Gold Rush. Thousands of European miners flooded the region, bringing violence and displacement. The rock shelter, which had been a home and a workspace for nearly 2,000 years, was suddenly abandoned. In the final layers, archaeologists found a piece of hooked wire and a strip of red cloth, European items. These were the harbingers of the end. The nets were left unfinished. The bags were dropped. The site froze in time, capturing the precise moment a way of life was interrupted. The Windmill Way discovery doesn't just fill a gap in the archaeological record, it validates the oral history of the Kuku-Warra people. It proves that their ancestors were not just stone tool users, they were master weavers, engineers of fibre who carried their world in woven bags. While the Roman Dodecahedron remains a mystery because its culture is dead, the fibre of Windmill Way is understood because the culture is alive. The descendants of the weavers are the ones holding the trowels, reconnecting the broken thread of their own history. Whether it is a bronze puzzle in England or a woven net in Australia, these objects remind us that the past was tactile. It was made of things people held, used and valued. Some of those things, like the dodecahedron, have lost their voice. Others, like the dilly bags, are finally speaking again. The timeline we walked today was vast, stretching from the frozen mud of the Ice Age to the crushing pressure of the abyss. Yet it represents only a fraction of what lies beneath our feet. As we've seen, the story of humanity isn't a finished book. It is a manuscript that is being constantly edited by every LiDAR scan and every brush of a trowel. Now we want to turn the compass over to you. Which of these lost worlds shifted your perspective the most? And where should our research team focus its lens next? Should we dive deeper into the submerged prehistory of the oceans, or scan the dense canopies of the unexplored continents? If you believe that the history books are due for a rewrite, consider joining our expedition by subscribing and leaving your theory in the comments. Your curiosity is the fuel that keeps this project moving forward. Until the next discovery, remember, history doesn't hide, it waits.